Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is an important conversation focusing on climate change and Rwanda's nationally determined contributions. We're going to look at what Rwanda is doing in terms of adaptation and mitigation regarding the negative effects of climate change, as well as looking at how youth can be involved in this very important conversation. I'm very happy to welcome our three guests tonight. I'll start with, from the Ministry of Environment, Biodiversity Management Specialist, Marshall Banamwana. Thank you for joining us on The Square tonight.
Thank you.
Also joining us on The Square, we have with us all the way from IUCN Rwanda, country representative, Mr. Charles Karangwa. Great to have you on the show, Charles.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us on behalf of youth who are really involved in climate change and environmental protection in Rwanda is Grace Ineza Umuhoza, who is the CEO and founder of the Green Fighter. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
My name is Diana PC, host of The Square. As always, I'm joined by The Square resident panelist, Charles Haber. Great to have you on the show, Charles.
Same here, Diana. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Also, usually with us, resident panelist on the show is Berna Namata, but unfortunately, she's not here with us tonight. So we'll just dive into the conversation. Thank you very much once again to our guests for being here, to our viewers, especially those who have been putting forward their suggestions and comments on our social media feed, which we'll read later on during the show. So the first question is just to do with Rwanda's contributions to global climate change frameworks. And this question is addressed to all panelists, but of course, I'll start with you, Marshall, from the Ministry of Environment. As part of its NDC's nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement, Rwanda was the first African country to submit a tougher climate target to the UN, promising to cut emissions at least by 16% in 2030 at the cost of $11 billion in regards of implementation. If you could just, Marshall, start by telling us how feasible is this very ambitious goal? How feasible is this in terms of implementation? And if you could just share with us what will be the impact in implementing this goal, the impact on ordinary Rwandan citizens?
Thank you very much, Diana. And I'm happy that we have this great opportunity to share with you and the Rwandan community on what the NDC entails and what is the contribution on the NDC for the prosperity or for the greening of the country. As you mentioned, 11 billion, it's a huge amount. It's an ambitious goal, and it's over the next 10 years. We need also to remind that. But it's if I can break it into two parts, there is part which we call unconditional contribution, which looks at the domestic and mobilization from the country and what the country would do for the next 10 years, which it's almost half of that amount. It takes, if we do it by plan, it would reduce up to 16% within the 38% which Rwanda intends to reduce for the next 10 years. And we have another part which we call conditional contribution, which looks at the international financing contribution, and that one takes up to 20% out of 38%. So, as you mentioned, it's an ambitious goal, but which looks at various sectors, namely agriculture, transport, waste management, forestry, land management, water, and there are a number of interventions which are broken down in the short term, long term, and in the near future. So, as you know, the NDC was submitted last year. To be precise, actually a year back. Cost was in May 2020. And upon submission, the resource mobilization starts immediately. And we have now, through ministry and all implementing agencies, we have what we call a resource mobilization strategy on how that money would be mobilized in the coming days. And we also have other activities which would help us even to track and monitor, of course, the mobilization and the implementation of activities set out in the NDC. That's what I can say briefly. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll definitely go a bit more into detail, later on in the show. I would like to hear from you, Charles, as well as Grace, in terms of this. We've heard from the government side, the government perspective. Charles, you're a partner implementer when it comes to some of these NDCs. If you could just share with us, from your perspective, how feasible do you think this is? And also, if you could just break down, I think what our viewers want to know, in setting up, in implementing this goal, what is the impact on you and me? What will have to change in terms of our lifestyles? What things do we also need to contribute as Rwandans for this goal to be implemented in the next 10 years? Over to you, Charles.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Diana, for that good question. I like how you stated it. It's ambitious, and I guess Rwanda is known from our ambitions. We're an ambitious country, and we are witnesses of what is possible in the last 25 years. What we achieved, no one could believe we can achieve it. And therefore, I believe strongly that setting the bar higher makes us that ambitious, and it's feasible. We can achieve our NDCs, and personally, from my experience and the work I do on day to day, I have no doubt that we can cut our emissions by 16% by 2030, and even becoming a net zero carbon by 2050. Of course, it takes joint efforts. Marsha mentioned about domestic financing, which is important. I wanted just to quote a recent report published by the United Nations Environment Programme, which highlighted that if the entire globe want to actually achieve the target of the Paris Agreement, we need to triple the investments in climate reduction activities, more specifically in nature-based solutions. And I guess it's the same for Rwanda from domestic finance. But I wanted just to highlight also that apart from domestic finance, Marsha mentioned the condition financing as well, whereby also other international partners, development partners, also are coming in, and that's also part of our role as IUCN in Rwanda, to support the government of Rwanda to mobilize resources, mostly focusing on the conditional part, both for adaptation and mitigation. So the sectors, when you look at the sectors of the NDCs, starting from AFALO, which is agriculture, forestry, and land use, it touches our day-to-day lives. It's food we eat, it's water we drink, it's the fresh air we breathe, it's the houses where we live, it's the environment where we educate our children, and that's where we invest every day, which makes it actually easy, because we are investing, while we are investing in climate mitigation and adaptation, we are investing in Rwandan citizens. You asked a good question about what are we benefiting, you and me, a farmer in Kibuye or in very far Nyagatare, how do they benefit from this? Rwanda actually is a good country to witness the changes of the impact of climate change. We have been seeing flooding in this country, and we cannot ignore that it's part of the impact of climate change in Rwanda. The Eastern Province droughts issues, which affects livestock and communities of farmers. But also, not only that, the agricultural productivity have reduced in some area, rainfall change and the whole aspects. So all these are part of the climate change induced problems. Now, by changing that narrative, investing in climate mitigation and adaptation, you are stopping flooding, which means you won't lose lives of people in the northern part of Rwanda, Gakenke, Rulindo, Nyabihu, and so. If you don't lose people, then you have that human capital there. The second is when you invest in, for example, one of the sectors is around water resources management and halting soil erosion. By reducing soil erosion, definitely you are improving agricultural productivity. So there's all those benefits that goes even to the far away farmer who is on farm or a small pastoralist there with his cattle to benefit. Then go back to the infrastructure and business investments. Definitely, every investor wants to put his money where he's very sure that he has security, and climate change brings insecurity on investments by mitigating and adapting. Investors also find Rwanda, of course, a good place to invest. I'll stop from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. I would also like to hear from you, Grace. What are your thoughts on this very ambitious goal, Rwanda, being the first African country to put forward, really tough target. What are your thoughts on it as a green activist, as someone very involved in environmental protection?
Thank you so much for the question. I will start first by really acknowledging that climate change is a result of a combined emission that generation put it into atmosphere, and we are currently living its impact. And Rwanda being a country that has set ambitious goals in order to achieve the Paris Agreement, or the national determined contribution, is a clear message that Rwanda government is taking a way step forward in acknowledging that most of our development is really vulnerable to the climate change impact. For example, in Rwanda, most of our population are farmers, which means they are more prone to climate impact issues such as flood, as mentioned with my colleagues. So it makes sense for Rwanda to be involved in really taking the pace to act. And having an ambition NDC is only a way to really prove that we can really innovate and be creative in making solutions, which I think is very important. And it's really sent a message not only to Rwandans, but also to Africans and other developing countries that there's no such thing as a limit in what we can do. And I like the question of saying, what can you and I do? And I would say, in order to achieve really our ambition NDC, it requires us to first understand what's our role, and also try to really acknowledge the fact that we are interlinked. And by interlinking, I mean we do have some role to play on each level, whether it be in education, whether it be in farming or investment, even in mobilizing research. So we need to be careful for every step that we are making and try to be as green as possible, because we are moving into a green transformative economy.
Thank you very much, Grace. Well said. And we'll get back to just learning more about the work that you do. It's not very common that we see really young people like yourself, spearheading initiatives to really push forward, the importance of environmental protection and safety. Charles, I'd like to hear your thoughts on just what our guests have just shared with us.
Thank you, Dan. Of course, a very timely discussion at a moment when Rwanda has set itself very aggressive targets. But I want to talk about 3 or 4 things. One, again, political will that Marshall was talking about, and you see, now that Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States of America, you can afford to punch him with your bare knuckles and be sure that he will bleed. He was one, it was quite irresponsible of him to tackle the Paris Agreement around addressing global issues of climate change, Diana. So, but for a country of Rwanda's size and intention to say, okay, fine, you're a global superpower, you have decided to take that direction, but for us, and sometimes it's very important not to create very big buzzwords. My namesake Charles and Grace there will say climate change, 2050 agenda, there's policymakers, Marshall will dazzle you. But sometimes it's very important to really break it down to very, very simple things of what Rwanda's political will means. Rwanda woke up in the morning and decided to chase everybody from the swamps, apart from the frogs. They got all the factories told them, no, move away, this place is for tadpoles. And they said, industries, what are you doing in these areas? People who are living here. And for a very long time, when people were hesitant to, especially those who are living in the low wetlands and the lowlands that were very prone to floods that Charles was talking about, the rains found them there. And it was a very sad situation for you to see helicopters trying to get people out of flooded areas. You would move around areas, Gasiata, towards Batsinda and Kagugu. If you loop that side and you see 10 years ago a factory that you'd see the entire factory, and then a few years later you can only see the roof. So some of these things are not theoretical. So that political will, it's not that we are trying to tick a Paris box. It's because yes, you can feel and touch the effects of climate change. People's lives are being lost. But even when you take it a notch higher and say, what is the quality of the air that we breathe? And how do you then feel it in your life? If you drive around Kigali and with your windows down 10 years ago and how it is today, it's quite a big difference. So, and then imagine 5 years from today when all these incentives will have been put in place. And that brings me to my third point around the importance of the incentives, because I think it's Charles who raised the point around the political will and the role of the private sector and the different other actors. So people invest to make money. So if you are going to tell people that, if you're going to tell a typical businessman that, you have to build a green building, he will ask you, what is in it for me? If you're going to ask an importer of cars that we need you to play a role in reducing your carbon footprint into our clean, or reduce your dirtening of our airspace, he will ask you, what is in it for me? So I think before the show began, I was talking to Marshall about the incentives that have then come in place that are fiscal, that somebody can touch and say, I am not going to be charged a tax to a certain extent. I have a fiscal benefit if I import charging stations for my motor vehicle cars. And the fuel consumption of those cars, especially the hybrid cars, is going to be a lot lower by a certain percentage, and therefore for a company like RBA, it's going to make a lot of sense to buy e-cars or hybrid cars, because at the end of the day, I'm saving my expenditure by X amount. So the political will, then giving credit where it's due, is something that we can feel and touch. And I think it's really a step in the right direction. As the show moves along, I'll be probably want to get Marshall to look deeper into addressing some of the challenges that are ensuring that are a stumbling block towards Rwanda going green, or fully green for that matter.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Definitely, I would like to just, picking up from what you've just said, Charles, talk about incentives, because as much as we talk about, all these agreements that Rwanda is signatory to when it comes to climate change and environmental protection and safety, I feel that it's kind of a conversation happening on a macro level. I want to bring it down to how we can get Rwandans to participate, how we can get Rwandans on board, whether it's you and I, Charles, here in Kigali, whether it's talking to farmers, up country. So I want to just pick up on what you said, Charles, regarding incentives. And I want to hear from Marshall and Charles, your namesake, on terms of what they think about.
I think for purposes of this show, you need to draw a line. Which Charles?
Just call me CK.
I'll focus on Charlie and Charles. Obviously, Charles is, so Charles, I'll just start off with you. What's your opinion on incentivizing, Rwandan businesses and Rwandan citizens in terms of adhering to what government is doing on a macro level, coming down to a micro level, what do you think about incentives? I know there's some e-cars, motor companies that are, engaging in importing e-cars, and maybe you can talk more about that. Charles, over to you.
No, thanks a lot. I like you. I always follow my namesake, provocating questions. Yeah. So, incentive is very key, actually, in how we are going to achieve this ambitious goal, for a number of reasons. It's not only about the government, it's about investors. And when I talk about investors, I'm also looking at a cooperative of a farmer or farmers who are cultivating rice in the east or in the western part of the country. They are also investors. I'm also looking at a youth association that is producing improved cooking stoves. They are all investors. So we need to put that into perspective, and when we create those incentives, definitely we need to put that into a category and say, for an investor who is in settlement and urbanization, who is in transport, these are the kind of incentives. But also for a smallholder farmer, these are the kind of incentives available. And I think from my perspective, the government is doing quite a lot. We cannot ignore that in the last 5 years, very limited households was using liquefied gas. And today, actually, that's the rhythm. When someone is not using liquefied gas or PG and others, definitely you feel like I'm not doing good to the nature, because it requires a lot of cutting if you have to use charcoal and wood. That's just one example, but also, and that to be done, the government have significantly subsidized that. And I will let Mashar probably talk about that. And you can look at transport. I mean, we are seeing quite a good number of investors who are coming into electrical motors and vehicles. I was very, very happy to drive an electrical car in Kigali, and I think I'm also changing my mindset personally towards that, because I have to play my role as a Rwandan if I want to contribute. And this is actually what Diana said. What can I do? What is my role as a citizen? I started from my own house, how much electricity I use, how much water I waste, how much waste generally I put out, or those kind of, that's my role as a citizen. And then I want to talk about the second type of incentive, which is the role of private sector also to create an incentive for smallholder farmers, for community. I will take an example. We are seeing quite a number of investors who are coming into hydroelectricity in Rwanda. And the big question is, when you put on a hydro power machinery down there with turbines, and there's sediments in water coming from upstream, definitely your investment is going to double or triple because of soil erosion sediments. Now, why can't you work with the smallholder farmers and put in place a payment for ecosystem services, an incentive to a farmer who is properly managing his land, who is protecting that soil to be eroded in water, and then you stabilize your investments than just replacing your turbine every 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So that's the second level of incentive for smallholder farmers. And this even goes beyond to even a public financing. And I guess in Rwanda, there's quite a number of initiatives of creating green jobs. I know a number of projects in this country that are really creating hundreds of jobs, green jobs even for farmers who are working on their farm, who are planting trees, who are protecting their land, who are investing in sustainable agriculture, etc. So incentive is part of the financing of our NDCs.
Thank you very much. I would like us to go to you, Marshall. If you could just share with us, your idea on incentives, maybe even coming from a government perspective, but also if you could just share with us some of the challenges that Rwanda faces in implementing some of these initiatives based on the Paris Agreement, if any.
Thank you very much, Diana. I think much have been said by Charles in terms of incentives, because there is an issue of mindset, how even you feel like you're responsible or you are playing part on the bigger game. From even the starting household, how do you behave, what are your contribution even to the water management, to the waste management, to the biomass, kind of what's the ground role of everyone, of any individual toward even a bigger picture. So as the government, of course, you can't incentivize everything, but there are priorities on sectors looking even at the how important some of the incentives would work out over time. He gave an example of LPG as one of the key sectors which has been incentivized in order to reduce the heavy burden we are having on our forest and reduce the biomass consumption. But that one is one of other incentives which are being created in order to help the Rwandans change their mindset. He mentioned the e-cars and e-motors, but sometimes we may have people who have misbelief on the e-motors, and even the cost is cheaper in long run, and investment, even it's sustainable, looking at benchmarking even from other sectors of how it has been happening worldwide. But in terms of also supporting the private sector, because the area of greening and sustainability requires not only the government to be leading, but also the big contribution from the private sector. How private sector understand the investment in the green jobs and all the infrastructures which are climate resilient. So looking at the challenge, I think challenges, the first is that behavior change, where people don't want to, still want to do things business as usual scenario. People don't want to change, and it takes time. Again, there is that resistance to change. There are two Charles. Charles on my right side mentioned whereby you wait until people die so that you can even take actions, which sometimes is bad. And of course, the government balance between the life of people and some of the business which have been illegally settled in some of the threatened area. So another challenge which I have to mention, which we all both know, it's that financial capacity to implement. And we know we are mobilizing resources. It's very demanding. Requirements are many, and if you want to move fast, you need clear outcomes, you need result on spot, and some of the activities may take time even to yield results. So there is that financial capacity, even technical capacity. We cannot, we need to acknowledge that we don't have enough, in terms of the good technologies and all the ingredients to make sure that we can cope with all the issues happening around. That's what I can say.
Yes. Again, I want to break it down in very, very simple terms of what Marshall means in terms of the financial capacity. So he did mention that it is a long-term benefit. So for you to make a deliberate decision, and that's why you'll find that most of the time governments are the ones who will invest a lot of resources, or institutional entities like IUCN,
the Green Fund,
or the Green Fund, or Global Green Growth Initiative. You know, the sort of institutional players like those are the ones who will bury their money with an anticipation of a long-term gain, and indeed, the long-term, there will be benefits in the long term. But the biggest challenge is, for instance, if you pick any bank X and you want to borrow money to buy an electric car, your interest rate will still be 18% to buy that electric car that the government of Rwanda has subsidized heavily, but the subsidy is only benefiting the seller of that car. Otherwise, without that subsidy, the car would not be at 40 million, it'd probably be at 48 million. The cost of you building a green building, for argument's sake, like here in RBA where we are, if this was an entirely green building, it's entirely running on solar, it's got very beautiful cross ventilation that's in such that you don't need any AC. It has glasses that do not emit any emissions, you know, and so on and so forth. The cost would probably be, and that's the point to Marshall's point, of 20-30% higher. He didn't give those numbers, but I think that's the point he was raising, that is a lot higher to build, but the benefits are in the long term, especially in the maintenance and what have you. It's something I live to, because in my day-to-day business we manage properties, and we can feel the cost of maintenance of a building that has any green aspects vis-a-vis a building that is totally your traditional brick and mortar. Now, in as long as we don't think about the last mile consumer, that person who is going to buy that car, that person who is going to build that building that is green, that developer who is going to develop 100 houses to be sold to Diana and Charles and Grace and Marshall and everybody else, the mortgages that you and I will get, that should not be at 18% because we have bought green homes, and therefore they should be at 12%. The fact that whoever is going to mobilize money is going to borrow at a less capacity, at a lower interest rate, because he's building green homes. So that multiplier effect has to be done, and I think this is where we sort of challenge the government to think a little bit harder. Say, we go out there and we do, and the central bank will call for treasury bills. What would it take for them tomorrow to float a green bond? And then whoever wants to sort of, whoever has to mobilize money in financial services space is able to then to access cheaper financing because they are going into a green venture. So again, the onus, in my opinion, it still lies predominantly on government and the government-related agency, central bank, Ministry of Finance, to then, for it to have that trickle-down effect, to say, yes, we have given tax incentives, yes, we are saying move away from the wetlands, yes, we are investing a lot of money in these parks, like if you look at the amount of money that's going into the Nyandungu park, for instance, and all these other amazing ventures. It's not enough, but how does it trickle down to that Muturaje down there who has been, who needs to live and eat on a day-to-day basis? I think that's really the trickle-down effect of greening our economy. Has to be felt by our ordinary citizens.
Absolutely, and thank you, Charles, for breaking it down. I just want to go now to the perspective on youth involvement. Grace, coming to you, Rwanda plans to be a low-carbon economy by 2050, and of course, youth involvement, youth representation is very important on this journey. So, Grace, you're the CEO and founder of the Green Fighters, a very interesting name that you've given your NGO, which is dedicated to the safety and protection of the environment. If you could just start by telling us a bit of how you started this journey as a green activist, if I may say, and then later on, share your perspective on the importance of youth representation, moving more from just advocacy to action. But just quickly, a bit more about how you started this journey as the founder and CEO of the Green Fighters.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for the question. If I can start off a little bit of the journey of the Green Fighter, I would say that it all started with an idea of what the youth can contribute in terms of achieving environment protection in Rwanda. This was an idea I got in 2017. I was still a student in the University of Rwanda. This was after being part of the 25 emerging young girls leaders across Africa and participating in the Convention of United Nations on desertification. This was, that journey really opened my eyes to really find out that there's something that young people, especially in my country, can be doing. And I was very confident that I was not the only one. So I started by first testing the water by trying to pitch my idea with different advisors, and then building up the team and go through action right away. So I do humbly recognize my team and really recognize the effort that we've been doing, because since 2018, we've been able to conduct 10 community-based projects or initiatives, reached more than 3,500 young people in Rwanda, and we do have young people involved in the international climate policy dialogues. So coming back again to your question about how young people can drive action beyond advocacy, I will start by saying that youth advocacy is very important, because while youth are sharing their voice and their concern in advocacy, they have a wider perspective of what the community concern and the community voice, because young people have the privilege to be in between generation, because we are too young for the elder generation, but yet not too old for the younger generation, which put us in a very good position in order to really conduct transformational change from generation to generations. So being in Rwanda, a country where it's really recognizable how young people are being inclusive in the policy making level, and also we are very humble in the climate change sector. We do learn from our elders, because we do have a set of advisors in different institutions who really take time and energy to really showcase us where's the way, what can we do. And for the young people to go beyond advocacy, there's a really need to actively recognize the ability and the skill invested in young people in delivering change at their own level, despite the challenges of working with young people. Being a female leader of a Global South Youth NGO, I'm pretty sure this came up with a very good set of challenges. But then I'm so humble and grateful for my team, because we do surely take daily steps with hope that we are going to achieve our goals. And for instance, if I can share an example, our colleague, Ms. Eva Peace Mukairanga, was selected to be part of the young people in the Global Summit of Youth Climate Driving Action in Milan, where she will be sharing the youth voices, women voices, and Africa voices in shaping a successful COP26, which is scheduled to be in November. And on the other side, we do have a team of young people invested in designing projects, community-based projects, trying to really come up with a solution on a community level in order to really address climate change impact or environment protection sector. So we've been able to design 5 projects, and one of them really won a Dragon Dean recognition as a good, outstanding project. There was a pitching session on a global level, and we were the first Global South, even young people, to ever win that recognition. So it's very important. It's really showcased that our team is capable. And last but not least, we are the founding member of the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition, which is a global youth initiative trying to really showcase that young people globally are really putting pressure to global leaders in order to take action, because, for instance, we are a little bit so tired of a lot of promises without action, so we want to really push. So we've been sending out letters to global leaders such as the USA administration and the COP26 presidency, and we've been able to have a meeting this week with the designated president of the COP26, President Alok Sharma. So there's a lot of example of what the youth are doing, which can really show that young people are on the move, and we surely don't want to be sitting around, waiting around for the solution to be bringing up to us. We want to really be part in the solution-making process. And it really takes courage and courage and energy to really go down and meet the young actors, listen to them, listen to their concern, and work consistently with them through the way in a consistent manner so that we can deliver change. That will be the only way that young people will be able to go from advocacy to really have tangible impact in the community.
Thank you very much, Grace. I love it. I love your passion. I love the seriousness, especially when you say you're really pushing leaders for more action, for more accountability, because at the end of the day, we are leaving this world, this planet in your hands. You know, we are leaving it to youth, and there's nothing worse than leaving just a horrible state of affairs in the next 4 or 5 decades. So keep up the good work, and thank you very much for the work that you're doing, not only in Rwanda but also with different youth-based initiatives across the globe. I'd like us to just quickly go to our Twitter feed, just read a couple of tweets that have been coming in. We have the first tweet coming in, if you could have that on our screens, from Philbert and Senyumba, who says, 2 years of implementation now, or supposedly, do we already know, or at least can we predict now, which mitigation path we will follow between conditional and unconditional, given that each one has got its financial implication and emission targets? That's the first tweet, and I think I would leave it to you, Marshall, to try and answer. Then we also have another tweet coming in, if you could just have this on our screens. This tweet comes in from Danny, who says, we all know the environment is pays the price of almost all human activities. It would be better if the panel reflects on how Rwanda can overcome this issue within this rate of population growth, and also tell us the long-term sustainability of environment as a solution. So he's talking about how we can marry this conversation to population growth. The last tweet we have is from Richard. Richard, who says that the COVID-19 pandemic has introduced a new factor into the climate change vibe. The institutions that are responsible to mobilize climate finance are the same expected to deliver resources for pandemic response and recovery. That's a challenge. Totally agree with Richard. Just so, Marshall, if you could share, some of your thoughts on the first tweet regarding the unconditional and conditional.
Thank you, and
just very quickly.
I think it's a reflection on which one we should take. I wouldn't say that we can avoid any of them because they go hand in hand. There is a responsibility of a government even to implement action, because in this it's not a standalone document. It's a kind of document, it's a kind of contribution which were developed based on existing framework, national circumstances, and extensive stakeholder consultation to understand each of the sectors, what's their role, what's their contribution, how do they intend to contribute towards the NDC actions, and again, looking even at the contribution of international community, development partners, existing financial contribution, financial capacity we have, and what we can be able to mobilize. So, giving us a dilemma of which one we should opt for, I think we still have both options on hand. We haven't lost hope. I like the first intervention from Charles. He said we are an ambitious country and have proved it for the last 25 years how ambitious we are and how we can achieve results despite using meager means. So on my side, on my viewpoint, I still believe we still have both conditional and unconditional opportunities on hand, and have been able to mobilize resources. We've been able to be part of various international coalitions, and we are trying to set up a kind of path toward a clear research mobilization strategy, a clear implementation of activities, and a clear framework for reporting and verification of what we'll be achieving over the coming years.
That's very important. I just want us to move to our closing remarks, but just very quickly, there's a tweet coming in, very interesting, and this tweet is, I think, in response to youth activities regarding environment. If you can have that on the screens. The tweet is from Jamima, who says that we have already started. I am an artist and I have been raising awareness about environment issues through art. And as we can see, that is an amazing sort of picture of one of the sculptures that she has done with regards to pushing forward, this important conversation in terms of environmental protection. Thank you very much, Jamima. I'd like us to just quickly give closing remarks all around through the panel in terms of, what next, the future, your expectations, but just, a wrap up on this conversation and words of advice you can share with, people who are listening, whether it's policymakers, whether it's just, Rwandan citizens. And I'll start with you, Grace, Charles, and then over to you, Charlie, and lastly to you, Marshall. We can be very brief with your closing remarks. Grace?
Thank you so much. If I can really be brief, I can say in Kinyarwanda we say turava kure, turaja kure. We can be translated, we are coming from far, going far. So in this sector of climate change, we really need to keep up the positive pace that we are going forward, and really need to be as inclusive as possible and really involve more actors, whether young women or any public or even education institution. Thank you
very much, Grace. Charles?
Yeah, I think the momentum is great. The next 10 years are called Decade of Action. So, as we say in English, it takes a village to raise a child. It's the same for climate. It takes everyone. It takes all category of people to achieve this ambitious goal. And I would definitely encourage everyone by saying that there's no small action when it comes to climate change. You have very small action when it comes to 12.5 million people in Rwanda. That's already a huge contribution. Finally, I guess it's also responsibility of private sector. To be honest, in this country we saw tremendous change, but we are also a country that is seeing huge private investments coming in, and sustainable investments is needed than ever before to curb the emissions.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Charles. Charlie, over to you.
I think it's extremely important that these things are broken down into very, very simple actions and in ways that everybody can simply understand. So I'll give you an example. A few days ago, the City of Kigali inspection department, or whoever is in charge of that, went around finding every construction site where they found people with supports. When you're building a multi-storied building, you'll have a support and you have 2 or 3 options. You can do with steel or iron bars, which is called scaffolding. So you can, yes, you can do that with tree logs, or you can do that with timber. And that is if you're supporting a slab or you're building on the side upwards. Now, if you're building with tree logs, it is illegal. And they went around finding everybody, I think, to the tune of about 1 million francs. Now, but that is because that for you to have those supports, you're cutting trees, and quite often it is young trees that you're cutting. So it is extremely important that we protect our forests. Now, the dilemma is, and back to Marshall's point that earlier on, the costs of protecting our environment is extremely high. But the cost of also going green is equally high. How are we educating our people? For instance, if I wanted to import scaffolding that I can rent out, shouldn't it be tax-free? Because I am actually helping people to solve a problem, and so on and so forth. So let's educate people. I saw that being done in Kigali. I said, I clapped my hand, but I asked myself, what about somewhere deep in Nyamagabe? Is it actually going to be implemented to the letter? Probably not. do they understand the importance of that? Even the people who are actually moving around with letters, finding people and collecting them, and do they understand that? Probably not. So I think, at the risk of repeating myself, Diane, I think it's important that the impact of these things is explained in very, very simple terms.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very quickly, over to you, Mr. Marshall. Closing remarks.
Thank you very much. I want to go far from what my colleagues mentioned. The synergy is needed. The time is now. And I start even by thanking you, because the more we explain, the more we break down, as Charlie mentioned, the more people understand, the more everyone understands his law. Absolutely. And eventually, the more everyone wants to contribute. So it's not late, but we haven't yet reached where we want to go. So let us keep informing, let us keep acting, let us keep looking at innovative solutions to make our life better and our country green.
Thank you.
And resilient. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you, Grace. Thank you very much to you, Charles. Thank you very much for your very important interventions. Thank you very much to you, Charlie. And also, last but not least, on behalf of the Ministry of Environment, thank you very much, Marshall. To our viewers, Sante Sana, thank you for tuning in. To those who have also been sharing their insights and questions on social media, please keep the conversation going using hashtag #TheSquareRW. Sorry, and to our partners, Uzi Collections and Warben Coffee, thank you very much for always supporting The Square. Have a good night. See you again next week.